The terms Ultimus and Primus refer to two distinct versions of the well-known four characters: Edward Richthofen, Tank Dempsey, Nikolai Belinsky, and Takeo Masaki in the Call of Duty Zombies storyline. These two teams come from different dimensions and timelines, leading to their unique personalities, developments, and motivations. While Ultimus is the original, often chaotic and brutal group, Primus represents a more enlightened, mature, and determined version of the characters. Ultimis, the chaotic original. Ultimus, which means the last in Latin, is the first and original version of the four characters, appearing in the classic Call of Duty Zombies timeline. These versions of the characters are darker, more unstable, and often plagued by deep-seated personal issues. The Ultimus timeline is shaped by events triggered by the experiments of Group 935 and the influence of Element 115 on the character's behavior. Ultimus Edward Richthofen. Ultimus Richthofen is perhaps the most cruel and insane version of the German scientist. Here he is thoroughly an antagonist, driven by a lust for power and his own madness. He has conducted gruesome experiments on humans and zombies and plans to gain control over the ether, a mystical dimension that would grant him the ability to manipulate space, time, and reality. Ultimus Richthofen is brutal, ruthless, and indifferent to the lives of others. He intends to manipulate his comrades to achieve his own goals. His plans involve betrayal, murder, and a power grab that could endanger the entire universe. Despite his acts of insanity, Richthofen is a genius whose knowledge of the ether and the workings of the multiverse forms the foundation for many of the events in the zombie storyline. Ultimus Tank Dempsey. Ultimus Dempsey is a tough American soldier who is often aggressive, loud, and very patriotic. He revels in combat and destruction, exhibiting a rough, warrior-like personality. His hatred for Richthofen is deeply rooted, as he knows the German scientist is untrustworthy. Dempsey is often the driving force in Ultimus when it comes to directly combating the undead, but he has little understanding of the larger, metaphysical threats they face. His aggressive and impulsive nature often leads to conflicts with the others, especially with Richthofen. Nevertheless, Dempsey remains a capable fighter, willing to fight to the death to save the world, even if he often appears cynical and disillusioned. Ultimus Nikolai Belinsky. Ultimus Nikolai is a tragic figure, with his alcoholism and cynicism defining his personality. This version of Nikolai is much darker than his Primus counterpart, as he is lost in his own depression and despair over the losses of his numerous wives. Although he is an experienced Soviet soldier, Nikolai is often portrayed as the comic relief in Ultimus, retreating into alcohol to numb the emotional pain and traumas of his past. His hatred for Richthofen and constant alcohol abuse often make him an unstable and unpredictable figure. Nikolai is the one in the Ultimus group most haunted by personal demons and often teeters on the edge of madness. Ultimus Takeo Masaki. Ultimus Takeo is a character heavily defined by his loyalty to the Emperor and his sense of honor. In this version, however, Takeo is somewhat more cartoonish and often in a state of distrust and paranoia. He has a deep, almost fanatical dedication to his Japanese culture and sees his role in the team as a divine mission. However, Takeo in Ultimus has less spiritual depth than his Primus counterpart and often comes across as distant or aloof. He fights to restore his honor, but his blind loyalty and pride often get in the way. He trusts no one completely, especially not Richthofen, and sees himself as the only one in the team who truly understands honor and duty. Primus, the mature warriors. Primus, which means the first in Latin, represents an alternative version of the four characters existing in a parallel timeline. Unlike the chaotic and unstable Ultimus versions, the Primus characters are more mature, reflective, and determined. They possess greater moral clarity with the goal of protecting the universe from the chaos of the ether and the undead. This version of the characters focuses on the heroes willing to sacrifice themselves to stop a greater threat. Primus Edward Richthofen. Primus Richthofen is a complex character who is less driven by pure madness and lust for power than his Ultimus counterpart. Although he is still ambitious and mysterious, he pursues a nobler plan in this version. His goal is to stabilize the multiverse and gain control over the ether to save reality rather than destroy it. He works more closely with the other characters, and while he is still not fully trusted, he shows a deeper sense of responsibility toward the team in Primus. His plans remain intricate and difficult to decipher, but it becomes clear that he no longer seeks personal power alone. He wants to save the universe, even if it means sacrificing himself. Primus Tank Dempsey. Primus Dempsey is more mature, reflective, and possesses greater moral clarity. While he remains the warrior soldier unafraid of battle, he develops a deeper understanding of the larger mission ahead of them. He begins to realize that it is not just about killing zombies, but about preserving the world and the universe from total destruction. Dempsey's relationship with Richthofen improves in Primus, as he recognizes that the scientist is genuinely trying to do the right thing this time. Despite still having a rough and tough personality, he develops a real camaraderie with the others, especially with Nikolai and Takeo, as they all fight against the supernatural together. Primus Nikolai Belinsky. Primus Nikolai shows remarkable development compared to his Ultimus counterpart. He is still haunted by his past and the loss of his wives, but in this version, he is more sober and focused. Primus Nikolai possesses deeper emotional depth and often serves as the moral center of the team. He has a much more reflective view of his past and no longer struggles against his inner demons. Instead, he recognizes that he must fight for the good of the universe. Throughout the story, Primus Nikolai develops a deep bond with the others, especially Takeo, with whom he shares a kind of spiritual connection. He remains sarcastic and cynical, but beneath this facade lies a man ready to sacrifice himself to do what is right. Primus Takeo Masaki. Primus Takeo is the most spiritual and mature version of his character. In this dimension, he is fully immersed in his role as a Bushido warrior, but unlike Ultimus Takeo, he is less driven by blind loyalty and pride. Primus Takeo is a deeper character who views his mission as a spiritual journey. He sees it as his duty to stabilize the multiverse and restore his honor by saving the world. Primus Takeo develops a close friendship with Nikolai and Dempsey, showing remarkable loyalty to his team. His relationship with Richthofen is still marked by distrust, but he recognizes that they must all work together to combat the greater evil. Ultimus versus Primus, the parallels and differences. The greatest distinction between Ultimus and Primus lies in their personal development and understanding of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. Ultimus. Is a chaotic, broken group driven by personal demons and selfish motives. They are often unstable, unpredictable, and work together rather reluctantly. Their actions are frequently marked by desperation, anger, and mistrust. The characters are deeply intertwined with their traumas and the darkness of their actions, leading to conflicts within the team. They are driven by the prospect of power and survival, but often lose sight of what they truly want to achieve. Primus on the other hand, is a mature, heroic version of the same characters. They have partially overcome their inner conflicts and work together decisively to avert a greater threat. This version of the team is much more altruistic and focused on protecting the universe rather than just securing their own survival. Their relationships with one another are characterized by trust, respect, and a shared mission. They recognize the necessity of setting aside their personal differences and unite to fight against evil. In the beginning, there was only the Ether and the Keepers. Among them were two beings who would later be known by many names. One of them would come to be known as Dr. Monty, while the other would be known as the Shadow Man. Over time, the Keepers created the Summoning Stone, a device that allowed them to manipulate the Ether. Now possessing power over reality itself, they used it to create Agartha. The Keepers later mastered the ability to travel between dimensions. At a certain point, some Keepers, including the Shadow Man, began to experiment with the Dark Ether, an energy that exists beneath creation. The Dark Ether corrupted and consumed their souls, and the corrupted Keepers became known as the Apothecons. The Apothecons created the Ether Pyramid, a device of absolute power. A rift formed between them and the Keepers, who remained untouched by the Dark Ether. Soon after, a war broke out between the Apothecons and the Untainted Keepers. Facing defeat, the Apothecons hid the Ether Pyramid on a moon in one of the newly discovered dimensions. After the Apothecons were banished into the Dark Ether, the remaining Keepers took on the role of guardians. Trapped in the Dark Ether, the Apothecons evolved over eons into twisted creatures that bore little resemblance to their keeper brethren. Their greatest desire was to return to Agartha. By September 5th AD, the Apothicons knew that Earth held a gateway to Agartha. They sent meteorites containing element 115 to the planet across various dimensions through space and time. They believed that humanity would one day use element 115 to wage war against one another, opening a rift that would allow the Apothicons to escape from the dark ether. The Great War. On January 15, 1292, the Great War began, a monumental conflict between humanity, including the Wolf King, and the Apothicons, waged across multiple dimensions. During the war, Sir Pablo Marinus was rescued from the clutches of Amargua by the four heroes known as Primus. On December 31, 1299, after more than 7 years of warfare, Primus, along with the Keepers and the rest of humanity, defeated the Apothicons, bringing an end to the Great War. Before seemingly vanishing from history, Primus instructed the Wolf King to begin the construction of his castle, which would later become known as Der Eisendrache. Years later, while fulfilling the dying wish of the Wolf King, his loyal servant Arthur scattered and buried the king's remains at the site of Der Eisendrache, accompanied by the king's wolf. Arthur was then teleported through temporal rifts to Resolution 1295 in Angola in the year 2025. In 1885, a blacksmith named Jebediah Brown was living in a mining town called Purgatory Point in the Old West. The mine contained large amounts of element 115, which started to affect people who went down there. One of the miners turned into a zombie and attacked Jebediah's mother, killing her. Wanting to find answers, Jebediah went down in the mine where he spent 5 days without realizing it. Later, on April 19, Jebediah had a vision in his sleep. 2 angels asked him to build a machine, a pack-a-punch machine, which became a success in the town. On June 30th, Jebediah had another vision. The 2 angels asked him to create an Agarthan device. The Agarthan device had 3 components: the blood of an elder god found at the bottom of the ocean, an elemental shard created by forging 4 human souls to a rock of element 115, and a metallic vril vessel. Jeb managed to craft the vessel, but had no means of obtaining the blood or the souls. After crafting the vril vessel, Jebediah upgraded it with the pack-a-punch. As a result of this, and the fracturing of the Earth after Ultimus helped Maxis launch rockets from the moon in 2025, a temporal rift was created, transporting the entire town, including Jebediah, to an underground cavern in Angola. Afterwards, zombies began to overrun the now-buried town, killing its inhabitants, including Jebediah. On June 30th, 1908, a meteor containing element 115 crashed near the stony Tunguska River in Siberia. Over the next decades, more deposits of element 115 were discovered in Germany, Japan, the United States of America, and on the moon. In 1931, after a large deposit of element 115 was found in Breslau, Dr. Ludwig Maxis formed Group 935 as an international German-led research team, becoming its head scientist. The Der Ries facility was established at Breslau. Maxis sought to use the newly discovered element to improve the human condition by developing advanced technologies. He invited Dr. Edward Richthofen, who would later be known as Ultimus Richthofen, to join Group 935. Richthofen agreed, secretly acting on behalf of the Illuminati's interests. By 1939, Maxis and Ultimus Richthofen started working on the first teleportation experiments with a matter transference prototype. The experiments were unsuccessful. The subjects were teleported, but their chemical composition was altered, leaving them catatonic and changed. Ultimus Richthofen also began the development of the Wunderwaffe DG2. In the same year, Maxis turned to the Reichstag and the Nazi Party for additional funding. They agreed to their request, expressing interest in Group 935's weapons research, teleportation technology, and the reanimated undead subject to help the Axis win the war. 1. Ultimus Richthofen and Dr. Schuster continued working on teleportation and successfully teleported a walnut during test trial 151. The result, however, failed to impress Maxis, who revealed to Ultimus Richthofen that Group 935 would be soon funded by Nazi Germany. Ultimus Richthofen worried this would lead to mass defections. He decided to continue the experiments with Schuster behind Max's back. In early 1940, Ultimus Richthofen and Schuster conducted the first human teleportation test. Ultimus Richthofen was so confident in its success that he volunteered himself. He was teleported to the moon where he encountered the Ether Pyramid, calling it MPD. While inspecting the device, Ultimus Richthofen was electrocuted and began hearing many voices of corruption, including the Shadowman's. He was then teleported to Shangri-La in the Himalayas, where he was worshipped by the natives who built an altar in his name. Ultimus Richthofen also encountered the focusing stone for the first time. Corrupted by the dark ether, Ultimus Richthofen was gradually driven insane by an obsession to reach Agartha. Ultimus Richthofen returned to Doris a few weeks later with a plan to build a station on the moon, called Griffin Station. He also renounced his involvement with the Illuminati. Frustrated with Maxis's alignment with Germany, other disgruntled Group 935 scientists joined his cause. Several months later, Maxis contacted the Reichstag High Command, requesting additional funds, stating that Dorisa lacked not only the funding, but a sufficient volume of element 115 as well. In response to his request, Nazi Germany built 2 new facilities in Berlin for Group 935. They were known as the Kino Facility, a repurposed theater, and the Asylum Facility at the Wittenau Sanatorium. The Imperial Japanese Army handed over the Rising Sun Facility to Group 935, which collaborated with Division 9 at the facility site. Group 935 also established a facility in Siberia near the Tunguska River and a research facility at Der Eisendrache, called Eagle's Nest. By 1942, Griffin Station was completed. Ultimus Richthofen appointed Dr. Grof as lead scientist and tasked him and Schuster to discover a way to power the MPD. While at the Rising Sun facility, Maxis developed the ray gun prototype, while H. Porter worked on the second-generation model. In May 1942, after soldiers returned from Africa, Ultimus Richthofen reported that they found a number of artifacts from an American town. Among the artifacts and documents recovered was pieces of the Pack-a-Punch machine from Jebediah Brown. Ultimus Richthofen gave the schematics to H. Porter to replicate Brown's work. Ultimus Richthofen also discovered plans for the Agarthan device and the Vril vessel, as well as the Vril device. On June 13, 1942, as a result of temporal rifts caused by Ultimus traveling through time to reach the Kino facility in 1963, Dr. Monty reached across time and space and offered little nudges. One nudge is helping Group 935 to develop element 115 fused elixirs. They created 4 medicinal beverages known colloquially as Juggernog, Quick Revive, Speed Cola, and Double Tap. At Griffin Station, Groff and Schuster unwittingly discover how to charge the MPD when Schuster killed a rat near the device. Its death inexplicably began charging the device by filling its tank. They reported their findings to Ultimus Richthofen, who began sending soldiers and scientists to be sacrificed to charge the MPD. By the end of 1942, Maxis expressed concern over element 115's impact on Ultimus Richthofen's behavior. Although no longer trusting him, he left his daughter Samantha in Ultimus Richthofen's care as Maxis himself was transferred to the Kino facility with his assistant Sophia to focus on creating Germany's undead army. In 1943, Nikolai Belinsky, who would later be known as Ultimus Nikolai, was captured during the Battle of Stalingrad and became a test subject for Group 935. The same year, Takeo Masaki, who would later be known as Ultimus Takeo, was captured by Group 935 on the orders of the Emperor. In 1944, Pablo Marinos, a Mexican spy, was captured by Group 935 at Der Eisendrache. In his cell, Pablo wrote of visions of a great war. He described a great battle against strange, demon-like creatures who were trying to devour the earth. In his visions, he saw 4 knights protected him from certain death. He made a note that the knights wore tunics similar to the statues in Der Eisendrache. In 1945, OSS operative Peter McCain infiltrated Group 935. In July 1945, Richthofen traveled to the Siberian facility to do further research on live specimens. As her temporary guardian, he took Samantha with him. Ultimus Richthofen also brought the Vril device with him. Several days after his arrival, a reporter was arrested near the facility. When Ultimus Richthofen interrogated him, the reporter revealed he was working for Mr. Rapt, who was looking for several artifacts, among them the Vril vessel. After Ultimus Richthofen refused to give him the vessel, he ordered the guards to kill the reporter. On August 1945, Group 935 began to transfer 3 test subjects for experimentation: Ultimus Nikolai, Pablo Marinos, and Ultimus Takeo. Ultimus Richthofen began experimenting on them few days after their arrival. Ultimus Richthofen also started looking at a way to create an elemental shard in order to build the Agarthan device. Suspecting Group 935 would lose control of their experiments, Peter's handler, Cornelius Purnell, sent a Marine recon team lead by Tank Dempsey, who would later be known as Ultimus Dempsey, to extract McCain, whose cover had been blown. In September 1945, during an operation with Harvey Jena, another American spy, Ultimus Richthofen extracted Pablo Marina's spleen. He noted that the barrier to unlock the human mind was not located in the spleen. Believing Marinus dead, they dumped him into the river. However, Pablo survived and would later awaken in a pocket dimension at the bottom of the river before swimming back to the Siberian facility, where he would remain for the next 20 years. Several days later, the recon team arrived at the asylum facility where an outbreak occurred. Ultimus Dempsey was captured and sent to Ultimus Richthofen in Siberia to replace Pablo Marinos. Ultimus Richthofen continued experimenting on Ultimus Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, and documented the personality traits of his test subjects. Dempsey's intellect seemed low, but his will was strong. Takeo was still staring at the floor, muttering what sounds like some kind of proverb over and over again. Nikolai had recently begun responding to stimuli, but only after injections of a new serum made primarily from vodka. Ultimus Richthofen noted that their minds had been almost entirely broken, with no memory remaining of who they once were. While at the Siberian facility, Ultimus Richthofen also experimented on Samantha. As he continued to find a way to build the Agarthan device, Ultimus Richthofen managed to siphon a piece of the souls of his 3 test subjects into a processed rock of element 115 using the Vril vessel. He used his own for the 4th soul required. As the souls were injected to the rock, it transformed and created a shard of glass. Unbeknownst to Ultimus Richthofen, by forging their souls to the element 115, he bound his soul and the ones from Nikolai Belinsky, Takeo Masaki, and Tank Dempsey to the ether across all dimensions. All their different versions were now connected to the ether through time and space. After learning from Harvey Jena that Maxis didn't mass-produce the Wunderwaffe DG2 as promised, Ultimus Richthofen started plotting to destroy Maxis and his daughter. He vowed that he would no longer continue to work on Maxis's undead army. With the war over, Maxis returned to Derisa in October 1945 and ordered Ultimus Richthofen to do likewise so they might continue their work on the matter transference device. Several days later, Ultimus Richthofen arrived at Derisa with his test subjects and Samantha. On October 12th, Grove contacted Ultimus Richthofen to inform him the MPD had been powered up and was awaiting the conduit. On October 13, 1945, during a series of teleportation test trials, Maxis used Samantha's dog Fluffy as test subject. Fluffy, now changed, was teleported back into the chamber. When Samantha saw Fluffy, she ran inside the teleporter. Maxis chased after her, and Ultimus Richthofen sealed them in the test chamber before teleporting them away. While Maxis was teleported to the crazy place where he learned the power to merge with electricity, Samantha was teleported to Griffin Station. She ran inside the MPD where she became corrupted by the dark ether. When he learned about the incident, Ultimus Richthofen ordered Grove to teleport Maxis to the moon to coax Samantha out of the device. Maxis approached the MPD and he persuaded her to come out. Once she did, Maxis gave her the instruction to kill them all before killing himself and merging with the technology of Griffin Station. Samantha then entered the MPD and unleashed the undead upon the base, killing anyone involved with the organization. The next day, an outbreak occurred at the Deris facility. H. Porter activated the alarm before killing himself. Ultimus Richthofen returned to the facility where he awoke Ultimus Dempsey, Takeo, and Nikolai. With no recollection of who they were or who Richthofen was, they agreed to help him. The 4 would become known as Ultimus, Richthofen's grand scheme. Several days later, Ultimus traveled to the Rising Sun facility where an outbreak occurred. In the facility, Ultimus discovered the corpse of Peter McCain, who died during a parachute incident after being ordered by Cornelius Purnell to rendezvous at the facility. Ultimus Richthofen also recovered his diary, which contained his research notes concerning element 115, and began to formulate a plan to defeat Samantha. A week later, Ultimus returned to Derisa, where Ultimus Richthofen planned to use the teleporter to return to the moon and confront Samantha. However, the Wunderwaffe DG-2 overloaded the teleporter and sent Ultimus to the Kino facility in 1963, causing Ultimus Richthofen to drop his diary, which was later recovered by the Soviet Union. This marked the first time Ultimus traveled across space and time and resulted in temporal rifts occurring across dimensions. In light of these developments, Monty felt obligated to step in and began to make changes in the background across time. He helped Group 935 invent perk machines. He also added chalk drawings to the walls. When Ultimus arrived at the Kino facility on October 28, 1963, they located a lunar lander and flew to the Ascension facility. In the weeks prior to Ultimus's arrival at the Ascension facility, a Russian scientist from the Ascension group named Yuri Zavoysky became corrupted by Samantha's voice after reading Ultimus Richthofen's diary. Yuri tricked his colleague, Dr. Anton Gersh, into activating a Gersh device. The rift created allowed Samantha to travel through. It also absorbed Gersh, destroying his body, and trapped him inside the Casimir mechanism. Yuri was also absorbed and transported to the Pentagon. When Ultimus arrived at the Ascension facility on November 6, 1963, they found the outbreak had occurred, and Gersh begged them to free him from the Casimir mechanism. At the same time in the Pentagon, John F. Kennedy, Robert McNamara, Fidel Castro, and Richard Nixon were discussing a future alliance between the United States and Cuba to fight Samantha when an outbreak occurred inside the building. Yuri, who was responsible for a prior outbreak in the Pentagon, was sent by Samantha to thwart their survival. After Ultimus freed Gersh from the Casimir mechanism, he sent them to their next destination before beginning his travels across space and time. With the departure of Ultimus from the Cosmodrome, both outbreaks were contained and Yuri was arrested. Ultimus arrived in a locked room at the Siberian facility on March 17, 2011, where George A. Romero, who had stumbled upon Group 935's research, was making a movie with Sarah Michelle Gellar, Robert Englund, Danny Trejo, and Michael Rooker. An outbreak soon occurred, and George Romero was turned into a zombie. The actors recovered the Vril device for Ultimus, who were then teleported to their next destination. The fate of the cast and crew remained unknown, but 6 weeks later, Romero's assistant, Sally, was teleported to Shangri-La and trapped inside a time loop while looking through Romero's research about Group 935. As they continued their journey, Ultimus arrived at Shangri-La on April 25, 1956. With the help of 2 explorers trapped inside the time loop, Brock and Gary, Ultimus acquired the focusing stone. Now in possession of the Vril device and the focusing stone, Ultimus Richthofen was ready to return to the moon. Ultimus Dempsey, however, fired the 3179 JGB-215 while inside the teleporter. This caused Ultimus to travel to the Pentagon before the November 6th outbreak had occurred. Meanwhile, Yuri was sent by Samantha to release the zombies kept in the Pentagon before being sent to November 6th. Once in the Pentagon, Ultimus traveled to Groom Lake, Nevada, where they used the teleporter to reach the moon. Once inside Griffin Station on October 13, 2025, Ultimus reactivated the MPD, which revealed Samantha as she was when she entered the device back in 1945. Ultimus Richthofen then used a terminal to power up the Vril device and merged it with the focusing stone. However, he encountered Maxis inside the terminal, who tried to stop him. However, Ultimus Richthofen was able to complete his grand scheme and switched his soul with that of Samantha's, gaining full control of the ether, while Samantha was trapped inside Richthofen's body. Ultimus Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo then decided to help the disembodied AI Maxis stop Ultimus Richthofen. They launched 3 missiles at the Earth in order to sever the link between the Earth and the ether. However, the calculations were made in haste, causing catastrophic destruction to the Earth. Meanwhile, in 2035, Victus was able to activate all 3 polarization devices in Maxis's favor. Maxis, now corrupted by the dark ether, returned to the moon in 2025 and plucked Samantha from Richthofen's body to join him in Agartha before destroying the Earth and all its inhabitants. As a last bit of revenge, Maxis trapped Ultimus Richthofen's soul in a zombie creating undead Richthofen, leaving his body in a catatonic state. Ultimus Dempsey, Takeo, Nikolai, and Richthofen's catatonic body were then accidentally teleported back to Groom Lake on August 3, 1963, where they were captured by Pernal and kept in Hangar 4 to be experimented on. Several months later, on October 13th, undead Richthofen stepped out of a portal from the empty earth and remerged his soul with Ultimus Richthofen's body, waking him from his coma. Sometime later, Primus teleported inside Hangar 4, where they freed and met with their Ultimus selves. Nikolai, now assuming the role of leader of the group, revealed to Ultimus there will be a war to be fought, a great war, before teleporting away from the hangar. Victus story. The missile launched by the Ultimus crew in 2025 left the Earth as a post-apocalyptic, crumbling wasteland littered with undead hordes as civilization collapsed. As survivors began to band together to form small human communities and shelters to protect themselves from the now global undead threat, Maxis realized the failure of his original plans due to hasty calculations and began contacting survivors to help him with his Plan B: activate global polarization devices and open a gateway to Agartha, where he would overpower Richthofen and use its energy to heal the Earth. Unbeknownst to his followers, Maxis secretly planned to commandeer the Ether's energy for his own use to open the gateway to Agartha and reunite with Samantha, which would ultimately destroy the Earth and its people. Ultimus Richthofen, unsatisfied with his limited power over the undead, planned to activate these polarization devices as well, which would grant him further manipulation of both zombies and humans and mend the rift, a direct gateway to Agartha, which would eternally damn the soul of Samantha Maxis in the process. Limited to communication with only those capable of hearing the voices of the ether, Ultimus Richthofen began his own quest for unlimited power. Over the years, Maxis's followers started constructing the first polarization device near the Hanford site in Green Run, Washington State. However, his followers began to doubt his goals and, believing him to be evil, proceeded to destroy the devices. Meanwhile, the Flesh, a society of survivors who ate the undead, was formed. As its members ate the flesh of the undead, they began to hear Ultimus Richthofen, who tried to persuade them to construct the polarization devices. Eventually, a battle broke out between Maxis's followers and the Flesh, with only a few left to escape as an undead horde descended upon them. Several years later, in 2035, Marlton Johnson, the sole survivor of the nuclear incident at Camp Edward and the missile strike, met with Abigail Misty Brierton in a diner near Green Run, where they also encountered two more survivors: Russman, a former Broken Arrow operative, and Samuel J. Stollinger, one of the remaining members of the Flesh, who used a stolen bus for transport. The four would become known as Victis, activating the polarization devices. At the Hanford site, Victus was contacted by Maxis, who revealed the town contains a polarization device required for his plans. At the same time, Ultimus Richthofen contacted Samuel, instructing him to foil Maxis's plans by activating the tower in his favor, beginning a race for power between Maxis and Ultimus Richthofen. Victus ultimately activated the tower for Maxis, consuming the essence of the entity called Avogadro. Victus was then teleported by Ultimus Richthofen to a skyscraper in the crumbled city of Shanghai, Province 22, China, in an attempt to gain control of the tower located there. Maxis also contacted Victus, hoping to convince them to give him control of the tower. Richthofen tried to blackmail Samuel into cooperating by threatening to reveal to his allies that he had consumed undead meat. Every time the group failed to carry out the objective and was killed by the zombie horde, Richthofen would use his power to bring them back, with no memories of their previous failures or deaths. Victus ultimately activated the second polarization device in Maxis's favor. Victus managed to escape the building they were trapped in and started to wander the world to reach the rift, hoping to find answers about the unseen forces commanding them. They traveled through the remains of Europe, crossed the Sahara Desert, and by December 31st, 2035, found a western town buried underground near the rift in southern Angola. The town was transported from the 1800s to underneath the mining facility by a temporal rift triggered by the fracturing of the earth 10 years earlier. In one of the cells, Victus found Arthur, who had been transported to the town from 1318 by a previous temporal rift. Maxis once again contacted the survivors, imploring them to activate the last spire in his favor. Meanwhile, Samuel was tasked with the same objective by Ultimus Richthofen, as it was also the last tower he needed to mend the rift and gain unlimited power. There's two endings in total, canon and alternate. Let's begin with canon. Canon ending. If the player decides to follow Maxis' Easter eggs in all three maps and polarize the towers in his favor, Maxis will gain control of the Ether and open a gateway to Agartha. He removes Samantha's soul from Richthofen's body back in 2025, and as a last revenge against his former assistant, Maxis traps Ultimus Richthofen's soul inside a zombie whose eyes become blue, becoming undead Richthofen. He then travels to the house and reunites with his daughter, Samantha. However, opening the portal to Agartha results in the destruction of the Earth and its inhabitants. Samantha, after witnessing her father's corruption by the Dark Ether, reached out through a temporal rift to the Maxis of Dimension 63 for help. Alternate ending. If the player decides to follow Richthofen's Easter eggs in all three maps and polarize the towers in his favor, the rift will be mended, eternally damning Samantha to Agartha and allowing Richthofen to fully manipulate the Ether's energies. With the Earth as his personal playground and Maxis' existence erased, Richthofen is now able to leave the Ether at will and uses the body of Samuel Stullinger as his physical host. Retrieving the Chronorium. Following Maxis' victory, the Victus crew was contacted by Primus Richthofen and offered an escape portal from the soon-to-be-destroyed Earth. Primus Richthofen had discovered his connection with Samuel Stullinger shortly after the events of Origins in Dimension 63, and had decided to use Victus to acquire the Chronorium, a book needed for his plan to find the summoning key. Primus Richthofen also instructed undead Richthofen, Ultimis, to pursue Victus and recover their blood vials. The escape portal led Victus to an abandoned Broken Arrow facility, which Roosman had previously worked at. There, they recovered a fragment of the elemental shard before providing blood samples, which transported them to empty Earth, still being chased by undead Richthofen. Escaping the zombie horde led by undead Richthofen, they arrived at Zero Base, a facility created by some version of Maxis in the empty Earth. While some of Victus felt that they were finally safe in Zero Base, Primus Richthofen informed Stullinger that the empty Earth was a tangential world, which would soon collapse due to their intrusion. Their only way out would be to recover the Chronorium stored within the base. After taking possession of the Chronorium, they departed through another rift, while undead Richthofen collected the blood samples they had left behind. Victus arrived inside Richthofen's lab beneath Alcatraz in Dimension 63, where they met with Primus Richthofen. Upon reading the Chronorium, Primus Richthofen discovered numerous timelines documenting their fates and learned about the blood vials. He would later write on the page, "I know now what I must do." ER April 7, 41. He then left his lab and collected Victus's blood samples from undead Richthofen in the empty Earth, retrieved the blood samples of Salvatore Sol De Luca, 386A, and Michael Finn O'Leary, 481B, in 1934, then gave the prisoner's blood samples to his younger self in 1914. Primus Richthofen then returned to the lab. He then offered to put Victus on ice inside suspension devices where they would be kept safe until the final world arrives, which Victus accepted. Shortly after being placed in stasis, the Primus crew from the future teleported to the lab, and Primus Richthofen gave the later version of himself the Victus blood samples. Richthofen's journey. Primus Richthofen alone was teleported to the house in Agartha and reunited with Maxis. Maxis explained to Primus Richthofen the plan to secure the Chronorium and locate the summoning key, and warned him that the test subjects must never be allowed to be awakened. While inside the house, Primus Richthofen discovered his connection with Samuel Stullinger and decided to use Victus to acquire the Chronorium. Primus Richthofen traveled back to 1940 in Dimension 63, where he contacted members of the Illuminati and enlisted their help to build a laboratory facility beneath Alcatraz. Several days later, he met with Stanley Ferguson and convinced him to assist with the Illuminati's construction of the Alcatraz laboratory. Having overseen the construction of a laboratory beneath Alcatraz, Richthofen returned to the house in Agartha, where he began to communicate with Stullinger. Together, they persuaded Victus to travel to a variety of locations in order to recover the Chronorium. When Primus Richthofen returned to the laboratory in 1941, he transported Victus to the lab to meet them. Upon reading the Chronorium, Primus Richthofen discovered numerous timelines documenting their fates and learned about the blood vials. He would later write on the page, I know now what I must do. ER April 7th, 41. He then left his lab and collected Victus's blood samples from undead Richthofen in the empty earth, retrieved the blood samples of Salvatore Sal De Luca and Michael Finn O'Leary in 1934, and gave the latter two to his younger self in 1914. Primus Richthofen returned to the lab and offered to put Victus on ice inside suspension devices, where they would be kept safe until the final world arrives. Shortly after putting Victus in stasis, the rest of the Primus team arrived in the lab from the Perdition Fracture, and Primus Richthofen gave them Victus blood samples. Following their departure, Primus Richthofen learned the location of the summoning key and traveled to Morgue City. There, he learned that the reporter had the summoning key and confronted him. The reporter, who had been warned by Monty's letter not to give the summoning key to anyone, ordered Richthofen to stay away before attacking him. Primus Richthofen killed the reporter in self-defense, but was unable to retrieve the artifact as the crate containing the summoning key had been sealed with ancient magic. In Morgue City, 4 individuals with checkered pasts, Floyd Campbell, Jessica Rose, Nero Blackstone, and Jack Vincent, were influenced by the Shadowmen to kill someone they knew. They were then drugged and upon waking, were manipulated into conducting a ritual, thinking it would absolve them of their sins. Instead, it allowed the Apothecons into Dimension 63. After realizing their mistake, the 4 worked with the Keepers to defeat the Shadow Man and trapped him inside the summoning key. Primus Richthofen returned to Morgue City and stole the summoning key, with the Shadow Man trapped within it, from the 4 before leaving the dimension. Primus Richthofen then traveled to Dimension 2210, where he secured the soul of a young innocent. Returning to the house, Monty was able to give the innocent soul a physical form named Eddie. He also took custody of the summoning key, though the Shadow Man ominously promised, "I'll be seeing you," foreshadowing his planned escape. Primus Richthofen then returned to the Ultimus dimension, where he stepped out of a teleporter moments after Ultimus Richthofen had teleported Maxis and Samantha away and killed his Ultimus self, triggering fractures across space and time. Primus story. In Dimension 63, in 1300, Sir Pablo Marinus, who had been transported back in time from the Pocket Dimension by Victus, began documenting the Great War, including everything he had learned about the Keepers, the Apothecons, and Element 115. Regarding Element 115's power, he noted that a site in northern France contained massive deposits of the element. In northern France, a tomb was constructed to honor the fallen soldiers of the Great War. Within it, statues of Primus were constructed to symbolize the hope that if one day a great evil falls upon mankind, they may return. Several centuries later, Dr. Ludwig Maxis and Dr. Edward Richthofen, who would later be known as Primus Richthofen, joined Group 935. In 1914, Primus Richthofen was visited by an older version of himself who handed him 2 blood vials and explained that he would need this blood and, when the time came, they would protect him. The older version of Primus Richthofen then left through a rift. In 1916, Group 935 discovered the journal of Sir Pablo Marinus. Using information gathered from the journal, Group 935 began work at a dig site in northern France, where they discovered a series of underground tombs. They struggled to gain access of the tomb's main chamber until the entrance unexpectedly opened when soldiers listened to a recording of La Source Noire. The camp's exposure to Element 115 began soon after. In 1917, Group 935 experimented with Element 115, dubbed Divinium by Maxis, and successfully created localized energy fields which appeared to function as portals. Maxis noted that objects could pass through them and speculated the rifts may have opened gateways across space and time. After witnessing the corruption of her father by the dark ether in the house, Samantha reached out to the Dimension 63 Maxis through the rifts Group 935 had opened. She begged for his help and revealed she was his daughter. Group 935 continued experimenting with Element 115 and the rifts. One day, an ancient box arrived through one of the portals. The box had the power to manifest weapons from different eras. Maxis feared Element 115 was disrupting the space-time continuum. Following the installation of Element 115 power generators, reports surfaced of ancient figures emerging from the dig site, corresponding with the mysterious deaths of several Group 935 soldiers. Using element 115, Group 935 later constructed 4 giant robots, including 3 named Freya, Odin, and Thor. Primus Richthofen noted that despite Group 935's progress at the dig site, he was troubled by Maxis's growing obsession with Sir Pablo Marina's diary. Meanwhile, Primus Tank Dempsey, Nikolai Belinsky, Takeo Masaki were dispatched by their respective governments to gather intel and investigate on Group 935's weapon technology and capabilities. By 1918, Maxis had become obsessed with Samantha, who spoke to him constantly. He believed her to be the key to everything and eventually swore to no longer serve Group 935's mission. On June 4, 1918, Element 115 awakened the undead knights from the Great War, who quickly consumed the camp. Maxis was rendered catatonic by the element, but Primus Richthofen was able to remove his brain before he turned. Primus Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo united with Primus Richthofen on the battlefield, put Maxis's brain in a drone, and helped free Samantha from her imprisonment in Agartha. Maxis's brain followed her to Agartha. When Maxis's brain arrived in the house in Agartha, Dr. Monty decided to step in and, despite the absence of his soul, recreated a physical manifestation of Maxis's Dimension 63 form. Monty then erased the original timeline's dark ether, corrupted Maxis from existence. After cleansing the remaining corruption from Samantha, Monty united her with the Dimension 63 incarnation of her father and Fluffy. At this point, Monty revealed to Maxis his plan to resolve the paradox wrought by a multiverse and create a new reality, one free of the apothecons. But it would only work if they enlisted the aid of souls who had lived through and survived the fracturing. Samantha sent Primus to the Ultimus dimension in 1943, where they formulated a plan to stop Ultimus Richthofen and prevent the events that were about to unfold. Shadowman's plan. The Shadowman was the only apothecon to survive the banishment in the Dark Ether and traveled across the multiverse to find a way for the other apothecons to reach Agartha. Posing as Mr. Rapt, the Shadowman hired the same reporter across different dimensions to retrieve the summoning key, as well as components for the Agarthan device. After learning the fate of Salvatore Sal DeLuca, Billy Handsome, Albert Weasel Arlington, and Michael Finn O'Leary in Dimension 63, the Shadowman contacted the Warden of Alcatraz during the 1930s and corrupted him. In 1932, Salvatore DeLuca, Billy Handsome, Albert Arlington, and Michael O'Leary were convicted and sent to Alcatraz. The next year, on April 1, 1933, Arlington convinced the other 3 that they could build a plane and escape the island. By the end of the year, however, the others realized the plane would never be completed. Embittered, they plotted to get revenge on Arlington. On December 31, 1933, DeLuca, O'Leary, and Finn lured Arlington to the roof and killed him. The Shadowman revealed to the Warden that he would transform the island with the souls of the 4 mobsters and create a trap to ensnare Primus Richthofen inside a pocket dimension. In January 1934, just a few days before they were executed, Primus Richthofen stepped through a portal and secured the blood samples of DeLuca and O'Leary. On January 19, 1934, Salvatore DeLuca, Billy Handsome, and Michael O'Leary were executed by electric chair for the murder of Arlington. After their execution, the Warden killed himself with the electric chair before disappearing from Dimension 63. In late 1943, the reporter recovered the summoning key in the South Pacific, the Seal of Duality, as well as a rock of element 115 in Russia. He then interviewed Stanley Ferguson, a retired guard who worked at the Alcatraz prison between 1933 and 1941. Ferguson gave the reporter a detailed account of the death of 4 mobsters and their plan to escape the rock. After learning their fate, the Shadowman went into the past and contacted the Warden of Alcatraz in the 1930s. On December 31, 1943, the reporter arrived in Morgue City, as requested by the Shadowman, to track down Floyd Campbell, Jessica Rose, Nero Blackstone, and Jack Vincent. Over the next few months, the reporter gathered enough information and sent a telegram providing their details. The Shadowman then influenced Campbell, Rose, Blackstone, and Vincent to kill someone they knew. Aware of the Shadowman's actions, Monty wrote to the reporter, warning him to not give the summoning key to anyone. On April 21st, 1944, Primus Richthofen arrived in Morgue City. The next day, he learned that the reporter had the summoning key and confronted him. The reporter waved Monty's letter to Richthofen and ordered him to stay away before attacking him. Primus Richthofen killed the reporter in self-defense, but was unable to retrieve the artifact as the crate containing the summoning key had been sealed with ancient magic. Several days later, Floyd Campbell, Jessica Rose, Nero Blackstone, and Jack Vincent awakened in a twisted version of Morgue City. The Shadow Man tricked them into performing rituals, which gave the Apothecons access to Dimension 63. After realizing their error, the four then worked with the Keepers to defeat the Shadow Man and trapped him inside the summoning key. At this point, Primus Richthofen stepped through a portal, stole the summoning key, and thanked the four for their efforts before leaving the dimension. The next day, the Apothecons consumed Dimension 63 and its inhabitants. Inside the summoning key, the Shadow Man contacted the Warden of Alcatraz and revealed to him that he would transform Alcatraz with the souls of the four mobsters and create a trap to ensnare Primus Richthofen inside the pocket dimension, thus creating a cycle. Quest for the Souls. In the Ultimus dimension, Primus Dempsey, Takeo, and Nikolai were teleported in by Samantha and arrived at the Der Reese facility moments after Ultimus Richthofen teleported Maxis and Samantha away. They ordered Ultimus Richthofen to awaken the test subjects Ultimus Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, who had been kept in stasis prior to the outbreak at Der Reese in the original timeline. At this point, the teleporter activated, and Primus Richthofen, now in possession of the summoning key, emerged and killed Ultimus Richthofen, then collected his soul within the summoning key, triggering fractures across space and time. Now inside the Deceptio fracture, Primus lit up a beacon within the facility, enabling Maxis to know where and when they were. Using a giant robot at Der Reese, Primus pursued a Group 935 truck carrying a cryostasis pod containing Ultimus Dempsey. The robot, however, was shot down by the soldiers, forcing Primus to continue on foot. They reached a gondola station which took them up to Eagle's Nest. However, they were too late to stop Ultimus Dempsey from being launched on a rocket toward Griffin Station. As they carried on with their mission, Primus Richthofen posed as his Ultimus self to fool Dr. Groff, though the latter gradually became suspicious of Richthofen's abnormal behavior. Eventually, Primus redirected the rocket containing Ultimus Dempsey's pod to hit the castle courtyard. In retaliation, Groff activated a failsafe, preventing them from tampering with the pod. Primus used the Vril device from the cryopod to conjure up the spirit of a keeper. The keeper then teleported the MPD from Griffin Station to the castle, but became corrupted by the dark ether in the process, forcing Primus to defeat it. Primus then used the summoning key to activate the MPD and launched dozens of V-2 rockets toward the moon, destroying it along with all Group 935 members within Griffin Station. As they approached Ultimus Dempsey's pod, Richthofen revealed his plan to eliminate their Ultimus counterparts and preserve their souls inside the summoning key. Dempsey, though initially resentful of the idea, agreed to the plan and took it upon himself to disable the pod's life support system, ending the life of Ultimus Dempsey. As he died, Primus Richthofen used the summoning key to capture and preserve his soul. With the death of Ultimus Dempsey, their goal at Griffin Castle was completed. Primus then teleported to the Perdition Fracture, where they were taken hostage on board a Japanese ship in the Pacific Ocean. While a Japanese officer was interrogating them about the summoning key, a massive wave struck the ship, sending everyone off their balance. A brief fight then ensued and the officer dropped the artifact. Primus then jumped overboard as the ship exploded and swam to a nearby island where they found a Division 9 facility. Primus discovered deep inside the facility a giant thrasher, locked within a cell, which was revealed to be Ultimus Takeo, who was being experimented on. Ultimus Takeo revealed to Primus Takeo that it was the Emperor himself who had ordered Division 9 to torture and experiment on him. Primus Takeo offered his Ultimus self a chance to right the wrongs of the universe, which he accepted. Ultimus Takeo committed seppuku, with Primus Takeo acting as his Kaishakunin. With his death, Primus Richthofen was able to secure the soul of Ultimus Takeo inside the summoning key. Primus then teleported to Primus Richthofen's laboratory beneath Alcatraz, where they met with an earlier version of Primus Richthofen before he acquired the summoning key. The earlier Primus Richthofen gave them the blood samples of Victis, and Primus stepped through a portal to their next destination. Primus accidentally teleported over the city of Stalingrad in the Agonia fracture. During the freefall, they grabbed onto the corpse of Peter McCain, who had gone through a portal and activated his parachute to land safely. They discovered an ongoing battle between dragons and Russian giant robots with Ultimus Nikolai as the sole survivor fighting zombies inside a Manticore mech. Upon noticing Primus, Ultimus Nikolai attempted to kill them, but was thrown into a building by a dragon before he could succeed. He later questioned who they were and if they could help him. Eventually, Primus reached Sophia, an AI made from the brain of Maxis's assistant Sophia, who had been attacked by a zombie during their stay at the Kino facility. She asked them to perform several tasks before a master password could be typed in, prompting Primus to complete the Ascension protocol. As they continued to follow Sophia Mamt's instructions, they found Gersh, who recognized them, yet knew they were not the same versions who freed him. Primus tricked Gersh into entering the systems of Sophia to extract information from him, leading to his destruction. With the Ascension protocol completed, Sophia flew away through space and time in hopes of finding Maxis. During their mission at Stalingrad, Monty contacted Primus, stating he had seen their misdeeds, and asked them to fix the universe as they were partially responsible for its fracture. Primus then reached Ultimus Nikolai, who made a temporary truce with them to kill the dragon. However, upon the dragon's death, Primus asked Ultimus Nikolai to surrender. Ultimus Nikolai refused and a brief fight broke out between them. Ultimately, Primus defeated Ultimus Nikolai, who was then approached by his Primus self. As he approached, Ultimus Nikolai asked if he would kill him now. Primus Nikolai apologized, stating he wished there was another way, and remarked he was suffering the same pain. He explained that Ultimus Nikolai turned to alcohol to hide agonizing memories of his wife's death during an air raid. In a fit of rage, Ultimus Nikolai fired upon his Primus self. However, the shot hit Primus Nikolai in his armored plate, causing no damage. In retaliation, Primus Nikolai responded by killing his Ultimus self, allowing Richthofen to secure his soul. With all the souls collected, Primus Richthofen sent them to the house in Agartha, where Monty turned them into children. When the souls arrived in the house, Maxis told Samantha and Eddie to put their toys away before coming down to the basement, creating a paradox. At some point, Maxis became overwhelmed by the voice of the Shadow Man, begging for his help from within the summoning key. When Maxis took the artifact, he released the Shadow Man and became trapped inside the summoning key himself. Once outside the house, the Shadow Man opened a gateway for the Apothecons, fracturing and corrupting Agartha and revealing the Apothecon's son. Primus fought the Apothecons and the Shadow Man. During the battle, Sophia arrived in Agartha. Using the summoning key in the Chronorium, Primus defeated the Shadow Man with the help of Sophia Maxis, still inside the summoning key, and Sophia then plunged inside the Apothecon's son, destroying the Apothecons and purging element 115 from the final universe. After the battle, Monty realized Primus drank the blood from their blood vials, blood coming from realities already closed off. This prevented Primus from fading out of existence and resulted in a paradox. As Monty was looking for a way to get rid of Primus, Primus Richthofen suggested he send them somewhere none of their other selves had ever been to. As a result, Primus was sent back to 1294, where they saved Pablo Marinas during the Great War between humanity and the Apothecons, ultimately creating a loop in time. Breaking the cycle, the Great War. When Pablo Marinas arrived in northern France in 1294, having been transported from the pocket dimension in Siberia, he fought alongside the Wolf King. He was saved from Amargua by Primus Richthofen after the Primus crew had been sent to the Great War by Monty. At this point, Primus Richthofen realized that Monty was lying about securing a better tomorrow. He realized that going to the Great War wouldn't break the cycle, as it was the end of their loop. Primus Richthofen finally understood that Monty wasn't inherently evil. He was trying to survive by saving the multiverse the only way he knew how. By fulfilling the prophecy of the cycle, Primus Richthofen and Dr. Monty had forged an endless loop. With the help of Pablo Marinas, Primus Richthofen started a plan to break the cycle. As Pablo Marinas was defending him from the zombies, Primus Richthofen powered up a teleportation device to travel to the Alcatraz pocket dimension. Before he left, Pablo gave him the elemental gem from the Staff of Fire. Primus Richthofen would then be known as Post-Great War Richthofen, Alcatraz pocket dimension. After their deaths, Salvatore Sal De Luca, Billy Handsome, Albert Weasel Arlington, and Michael Finn O'Leary were trapped inside a perpetual cycle in the Alcatraz pocket dimension created by the Warden for the Shadowmen. The four mobsters began their escape plan before realizing they weren't in the prison. While fighting off the zombies and the Warden, they constructed a plane based on Arlington design before taking off and crashing against the Golden Gate Bridge. The cycle continues. If Salvatore DeLuca, Billy Handsome, and Michael O'Leary kill Albert Arlington on the Golden Gate, the cycle continues, with the mobsters dying and returning to Alcatraz, and only Arlington having any memory of what happened before. Upon arriving from the Prodigion fracture, another iteration of Primis arrived in the Alcatraz pocket dimension, farther from their destination than they intended, and made their way to a laboratory on the west side of the island. In the laboratory, they found the earlier version of Primus Richthofen before his journey to Morgue City, reading the chronorium as he waited for them to arrive. The lone Richthofen stated they were late before giving them the blood vials. He then strongly advised Primus Richthofen read the chronorium again before he left via his own portal. Upon reading it, Primus Richthofen realized the pages had changed. The cycle is broken. If Arlington successfully kills Salvatore DeLuca, Billy Handsome, and Michael O'Leary on the Golden Gate, the cycle is broken. This allows the mobsters to escape their cycle and free their spirits from their bodies. With their cycle now broken, the four mobsters will help Primus escaping the pocket dimension. Upon arriving from the Perdition fracture, another iteration of Primus arrived in the Alcatraz pocket dimension, farther from their destination than they intended, and made their way to a laboratory on the west side of the island. In the laboratory, they found the earlier version of Primus Richthofen before his journey to Morgue City, reading the chronorium as he waited for them to arrive. The lone Richthofen stated they were late before giving them the blood vials. He then strongly advised Primus Richthofen read the chronorium again before he left via his own portal. Upon reading it, Primus Richthofen realized the pages had changed. Upon arriving from the Perdition fracture, another iteration of Primus arrived in the Alcatraz pocket dimension, farther from their destination than they intended, and made their way to a laboratory on the west side of the island. In the laboratory, they found the earlier version of Primus Richthofen before his journey to Morgue City, reading the chronorium as he waited for them to arrive. The lone Richthofen stated they were late before giving them the blood vials. He then strongly advised Primus Richthofen read the chronorium again before he left via his own portal. Upon reading it, Primus Richthofen realized the pages had changed. Primus traveled through the cell blocks while fending off zombies to escape through another rift. However, this was prevented by the Warden, who destroyed the rift before Primus could leave. Primus Richthofen then realized they were now trapped inside the Alcatraz pocket dimension, as the Shadow Man had intended. While exploring Alcatraz, Primus Richthofen began hearing Samuel J. Stillinger inside his head and realized the lighthouse must have triggered a chain reaction in the ether. Primus also discovered the Warden's inner sanctum, where they found the Warden's body attached to an electric chair. As they were retrieving the chronorium, Arlington, now in the form of a seagull, stole the book. After recovering it, Primus placed it on the Warden's body. Using the chronorium, Primus helped several spirits trapped inside the dimension before placing the summoning key inside the Warden's body to be used as conduit to his soul. This resulted in the partial destruction of the lighthouse, which fired a red beam of light toward the sky and prompted the Warden to attack Primus, stating they now belonged to him before knocking them out and locking each of them in a cell. The Warden explained to Primus that they would be trapped in the pocket dimension forever, suffering with their blood extracted by his machine, as it was the key to keep the gateway open and also freed the Shadowmen and the Apothecons. However, after the Warden left, Arlington arrived and helped Primus escape their cells. As they ran back to the lab, they were stopped by the Warden, who turned into a giant version of himself. He was, however, restrained by the spirits of Salvatore DeLuca, Billy Handsome, and Finn O'Leary, who launched him into the sky. Inside the lab, another cryopod was revealed, and Primus started its thawing sequence. Primus then confronted the Warden in front of the dark mechanism next to the Model Industries to prevent him from acquiring the last piece of the mechanism. During the fight, Primus Richthofen decided to step inside the dark mechanism and gave his blood. In the meantime, the cryopod opened, revealing post-Great War Richthofen wearing chainmail and holding the elemental gem. He joined the fight and used the gem to kill the Warden and the zombies, freeing their spirits from the pocket dimension. Post-Great War Richthofen revealed to Primus Nikolai that the future had changed and handed him the chronorium, advising him to read it. He explained to Primus Nikolai that he must keep his soul in order to defeat Monty, to which Primus Nikolai replied, "Who?" Several portals appeared, and post-Great War Richthofen moved to the Dark Mechanism, where he revealed to Primus Richthofen that the cycle was now broken and that their insurance policies, the blood vials, were no longer needed. He grabbed the summoning key and joined Primus, who had smashed their blood vials before stepping through the portals, leaving Primus Richthofen to die as the pocket dimension was collapsing. Nikolai's grand scheme. After leaving Alcatraz, Primus Nikolai, now assuming the role of leader, Dempsey, Takeo, and post-Great War Richthofen, teleported into Hangar 4 at Groom Lake in 1963, where they met and freed their captured Ultimus selves, including the post-merge of the catatonic and undead Richthofen. Primus Nikolai revealed to them that there would be a war to be fought, the Great War, before teleporting away from the hangar. Acquiring the elemental shard, Primus and Ultimus then arrived at Camp Edward, Nevada on October 13, 2025. They reactivated the facility and its Adat-Wonkama Rushmore. The elemental shard to proceed was locked inside the American Pyramid device, and Rushmore tested them before granting them access to it. During their exploration, they found Peter McCain trapped inside an android. With the help of Rushmore, who deemed Peter someone very important to humanity's future, Primus and Ultimus transferred him to an elemental orb, which then flew away from Camp Edward. When they opened the pyramid, they released Cornelius Purnell, who had been transformed by the shard into the monstrous entity Avogadro. With the release of Avogadro, a nuke was detonated but was ineffective. They managed to contain Avogadro inside the APD long enough for Rushmore to transfer it to the Hanford site. After they retrieved the shard, Maxis contacted them, saying it was too late. Maxis then teleported Samantha and Eddie away from the house before being devoured by Monty. When Samantha arrived at Camp Edward, she unleashed her fury, causing tremendous damage to Camp Edward, before stating to Eddie that they would fight the Great War, kill Monty, and burn the house to the ground, resolving the paradox. After their journey to Camp Edward, Primus and Ultimus, accompanied with Samantha and Eddie, settled down in a forest. They proceeded to celebrate their future victory around a campfire, drinking and eating. Primus Nikolai explained to them that the Great War, the Apothecons, the Keepers, the Dark Ether, the Shadowmen, and Monty are just legend and tales from the chronorium. He revealed both the Shadowmen and Monty became corrupted by the Dark Ether, one from his own ambition and the other trying desperately to save his friend. He revealed the greatest war was the war they were fighting against themselves. As they keep celebrating, Primus Nikolai told them to think about what they desired, where they would like to go. Unbeknownst to them, the members of Primus and Ultimus had their drinks poisoned by Primus Nikolai. All of them, save for Primus Nikolai, Ultimus Richthofen, Samantha, and Eddie, died to help resolve the paradox. With Primus Richthofen's death, Ultimus Richthofen reverted to undead Richthofen. Undead Richthofen then contacted Victus, who exited their cryogenic pods and stepped through a portal before the Alcatraz pocket dimension collapsed. Victus arrived in the abandoned Group 935 Siberian facility of a different pocket dimension and was instructed by undead Richthofen to build an Agartha device. In the facility, they encountered Pablo Marinus, who had survived the operation performed by Ultimus Richthofen in 1945 and had been living inside the facility as a hermit for 20 years. Pablo Marinus told Victus he could build the Agarthan device for them. Victus recovered the Vril vessel inside the facility, as well as the blood of an Apothecon inside the stranded Ascension Group ship. They also retrieved the elemental shards sent by Primus Nikolai and gave them to Pablo Marinus. When the Agarthan device was completed, the presence of the Apothecon blood caused the species of Apothecons and Keepers to reunite as one, resolving the duality that existed between the species. As Victus activated the Agarthan device, it started to evolve, affecting all the element 115 in the area. Primus Nikolai tasked Victus to stay close to the device and to protect it until it reached its final state. Once charged, Victus returned the Agarthan device to Pablo Marinus, who used it to create a portal in order to go to the Great War and help Primus Richthofen in breaking the cycle. Victus then retrieved the device and sent it to Primus Nikolai. Using the Agarthan device, Primus Nikolai destroyed the summoning key to open the way through before killing undead Richthofen. With the destruction of the summoning key, reality collapsed, and the entirety of creation started to fade away, including Victus, the zombies, the apothecans, Element 115, and Monty himself. Everything that spewed forth from the ether was banished to where they belonged, the dark ether. Primus Nikolai then asked Samantha to kill him. With the death of Primus and Ultimus, the paradox was resolved. As the multiverse faded away, Samantha and Eddie walked towards the light and into the new universe, in a better tomorrow.